everyone. We are Team COVID Survivors. My name is Brittany.
My name is Mary.
And my name is Jacob.
My name is Caitlin.
And my name is Anitra.
So this is our team. First, we have Brittany. She's a senior in organizational leadership and human resources. That's Mary, me. I'm a sophomore in organizational leadership. We have Jacob, who's a senior in anthropology. Then we have Caitlin, who is a sophomore in visual effects and compositing. And then we have Anitra, who is a senior in anthropology and then health and disease. So for our team, we all took the Myers-Briggs test, and a lot of us are extroverts, which can be really helpful because we're all very outgoing, have a good amount of ideas. We are all in a range of majors, which is really cool. We get a lot of different perspectives. And then we also have a range of ages, people who are seniors and sophomores, so people who have had a lot of experience in school, and then people who have been at Purdue for a little bit less time, but we all understand what it's like to be at school during COVID. So our user definition is as reads: symptomatic COVID-19 college students who have gone through the testing, quarantine, and readmittance to society process. Also, these users while in quarantine experienced both physical and mental health issues and how they dealt with those problems. And then our problem statement is quarantined COVID-19 college students who struggle with mental health while in quarantine. This is due to any of these problems, such as schoolwork, little to no human interaction, foreign living arrangements, lack of communication with university and health officials, and or COVID-19 symptoms.
So to begin, I am going to talk about how we planned our interviews. And overall, we conducted interviews mostly with college students who were symptomatic with COVID-19 and who were also comfortable with just sharing their journey. We kept all of our interviews confidential since this is such a sensitive and relevant subject. And we listed our interview questions. So just to briefly go over those, we wanted to focus on the stigma that students experienced, what symptoms they had, how it affected just their mental health, their academic life, their social life, and how they responded to that coming out of quarantine. And here's a overview of our field notes. So we mostly interviewed Purdue college students, but we did interview a few different students from different colleges. We interviewed a Protect Purdue representative just to see what their process is and just how organized they are. And then we interviewed front desk staff at Purdue Village who are responsible for just filtering the calls from quarantine housing and assisting those students. And overall, at the beginning, we really found issues with the food and packaging that is provided to students in quarantine. Later on, we started to really notice the negative impact that students were experiencing on their mental health. So whether that is just lack of motivation from just physical fatigue or stress from gaining necessities or feeling alone, which really led us to focus on the decreasing mental health that students experience. And I included some quotes from our interviews, which really helped tell the story of what students actually experience. So the first one is, COVID stole away my ability to socialize with peers. I noticed that I struggled doing my academic work. Isolation didn't help me focus, surprisingly enough. And then the second is, she cried almost every day in quarantine out of stress and worry. She felt very isolated from all campus and her friends. And then the third one, I personally asked this question to somebody who worked at the front desk that filtered quarantine calls. And I asked, how can you tell residents feel sad or alone? And the staff member said, by the tone of their voice and how long they stay on the phone. Not all residents are like this, but quite a few sound just sad. So as I stated before, our design idea focus is to improve mental health for students in quarantine. Again, this is because students feel unsupported. Some have received negative feedback and reactions from either neighbors, family, or roommates. Feeling disconnected, not having a strong sense of just assistance or even support while in quarantine, um, confusion on who to contact when they need help, whether that is just because their apartment is out of power in quarantine or food wasn't delivered. And we kind of began basing this off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs because at the beginning, we focused on how students were having a lot of stress just fulfilling their physical needs, like obtaining food, having enough water bottles, things like that. And then moving on up to just the hard, like emotional impact that the students were having.
So we came up with about 35 or design ideas and settled on the top 8, which included creating a recyclable food source, an anonymous group chat, a buddy system, a group therapy, a food pantry for students to donate for others in quarantine, creating a journal or a planner. Of these top 8 designs, we decided on 3, which were creating a quarantine app, a journal or planner for students to keep track of their experience while in quarantine and after, and a buddy system for students to have someone to interact with without actually physically having to meet up while they're in quarantine. So with these top 3, the quarantine app, the buddy system, and the journal, we created a decision matrix. For our criteria, we decided on aesthetics, value, functionality, and accessibility. We decided on this criteria because out of the 3, we figured that aesthetically, they needed to be aesthetically pleasing for the purpose of guaranteeing use by the students. Value was determined of how valuable that would be to helping students with their mental health through using either of these products. Functionality would be how easy it would be able to use it for the students when it came to actually being in quarantine or outside of quarantine. And then accessibility would be how accessible it is for the students, whether that be being able to get them the product or them having a link or something to actually access it. And then for the constraints, we decided on cost and time as the major constraints when it came to creating the product and how much time we would have to do it. Okay. With these criteria and constraints, the top design idea ended up being the quarantine app with a total of 385 points when multiplying. So for our market research, we decided to look at other colleges who may or may not have had some mental health resources for students, and also looking into support groups. The University of Michigan didn't really have too much of a podcast talking about COVID. For Rice University, they had a risk crisis management line that you could call or text about COVID. They also had a website hub for students who needed help with COVID. Some other colleges that we looked at were Indiana University, where they had voluntary testing. They also provided symptom trackers, and they also encourage students to quarantine at home if possible, so they weren't having to move to a new area that would create more stress mentally and physically. Some of the support groups that we looked at were just ones that were in Lafayette area. Some of them included a women's health support group or support groups for students who were struggling with drug use. The biggest thing about creating support groups was just maintaining confidentiality and being able to ensure that people know whether they're able to keep that confidentiality within the group or not, and allowing that space to feel safe.
So for our patent research, we got a lot of the design ideas from Facebook. Facebook has done a great job with their patents. With the multi-user conversation threads and posts, then the messaging function, which helps a lot more private conversations, then the 3D user interface, which allows for people to interact in a three-dimensional space online. Then, for Purdue, Protect Purdue, website is it allowed for protection of the media and statement such as Protect Purdue. Now onto the stakeholder feedback. While interviewing students and others who were in quarantine, they said mental health was the biggest challenge for them. This was either because of the lack of social interaction or the amount of schoolwork that they were missing. Then, while later interviewing, we started to mention that about if they would rather use a website or an app. And some of them did say that they would use an app, while others said they would use a website rather than an app due to it only being able to use for a shorter amount of time. Which, of course, then led us to confirm that we should use an app website instead of an app.
So we had a lot of alternative and opposing perspectives. Our other top ideas were to create a journal for students with COVID to be able to record their experience, a buddy system for those in quarantine, to have someone in a similar situation to talk and keep up with, which I know would be an amazing thing just for people in isolation to be able to talk to someone. And then to create a quarantine app. There was also a point where we talked about food was an essential, or it was an issue that came up a lot when talking to students, and potentially creating some alternative food service as well. So our final design we came up with was the website for those in quarantine to use. It includes resources, games, and also a forum to chat. The goal is to help with mental health during and after quarantine and allow students to stay connected while being isolated or post-isolation. Students will feel supported and have a way to see guidance from others in a similar situation rather than being isolated and alone from others. So how is our design innovative? Currently, few mental health resources for those with quarantine, with COVID, while in or out of quarantine at Purdue. There is designs with different listed resources available, games and activities to pass time, platforms to build connections, support and encourage one another, all in one place rather than looking for different avenues.